So today I finished the construction of my Frank Lloyd Wright bench seat slash stool, chair, whatever you want to call it. I finished it. So in part one of this two-part build, I took my prototype that I made in cardboard and started translating that over into oak. And so for my last video, I made 2 through mortise and tenon joints and also cut my material down to size. Today we are going to be creating 2 more mortise and tenons, but at an angle, and also doing a bunch of lap joints, joining together a seat, and doing a full glue up of that. So let's start cutting. What I'm doing right now is marking where I'm going to be placing biscuits. So this is a biscuit cutter. A few things that you really need to know about this. One is make sure you're using the appropriate setting on here for the size of biscuit that you have, because it changes the depth that the biscuit cutter goes into the wood based on what this number is dialed in at. So you want to make sure that you have this set up correctly, or you're going to end up with holes significantly larger or smaller than what you intended to make. So most biscuits that you're looking at will have a number written on the side of them. So this one's a number 20. So you're going to want this to be turned to 20, and they go down all the way down to 0, and the 0 is quite a bit smaller than this. And for something this big, I think a 20 is going to work just fine. The biscuit cutter works by putting pressure on the this front plate, and then it protrudes out the blade, and so the blade plunges into the wood. So and there's a spring on most of these that are going to provide a little bit of resistance, so you have to actually give it a little bit of a tug into it, so you have to apply a little bit of force. This one also has an angle, so you can actually set this at different angles if you're going into an angled surface. So that's something to keep in mind. And also that this 90-degree or whatever angle finder that whatever angle you decide to go with, I'm going to go with 90 degrees. This can also be adjusted to go up or down. So there's a little wheel over here. So depending on how thick of the stock that you're cutting, you'll want to adjust this to go usually toward the center of the material that you're working with. So I'm working with a 3/4. So I'm going to set this toward the center of the board. Go ahead and lock that down. And because this requires pressure to be put onto it, I usually like to see my students clamping down the piece of wood that they're going to be using for the biscuit cutter onto the sides of the table. So when they're pushing this down, they're not holding the material that they're creating the biscuit. The biscuits basically function as a floating tenon, so it's basically a mortise that you're creating with these. So the kind of oblong mortises that you're creating, you don't want them to be shifting around while you're doing this. So, and also the other problem that people have pretty commonly with a biscuit cutter is they'll do their plunge cut and they have accidentally risen it up a little bit, because it does take that a little bit of pressure. So sometimes it shifts slightly up, so the angle of the mortise shifts a little bit. So when you go to line it all up at the very end, you suddenly have a biscuit that's not lining up appropriately. So be aware of that. Try to keep it perfectly level. You could put another clamp right on the 90-degree guide here to keep it level. That seems like a lot of work. I usually don't do that. A lot of times what I do is I'll push it in, and if I have any doubt whatsoever that, oh, maybe I shifted, it kind of felt like it wiggled a little bit on me, then I'll do it one more time and be just hyper aware of it that time. Sometimes that will create, if you did get it wrong the first time, it will create a slightly bigger hole, but that's better than having a hole that's misaligned. Alrighty. Biscuits. Better with gravy. So when you're looking at your mortise and tenon, the regular 90-degree mortise and tenon is pretty straightforward. You can wrap your mind easily around that. But when you start getting into an angle, it gets a little bit more confusing. You kind of, if I know that my mortise and tenon is going to be in this orientation, the temptation is to try to make all of this in this weird, the mortise to try to match up with this, and then it's going to get you, one, really close to your edge over here, and two, you're going to have to be drilling and chiseling at weird angles, which is just going to be difficult to go about. So the trick is to take what looks like an angled mortise and tenon and actually remove your material to create a normal, a straight 90-degree angled mortise and tenon going into the side at an angle. So this gives me it's a little bit less area that it's going to be biting into in the joinery, but this allows me to easily make my mortise the same way that I did last time with my 90-degree one. So it allows me to do that just straight in, drill out all my holes. I'm going to just use a mortiser because that's going to be the simplest way for me to go about it. But now I need to make all my marks, plan that out. I can cut down my tenon, but I'm going to wait to do my finishing cutting down of my tenon until I have this a little bit more mapped out, just so I don't want to remove too much material, because I do want as much purchase material as I possibly can have inside of the mortise and tenon, because there is going to be a lot of force acting on this. So I do want it to be as strong as possible. So leaving as much of this tenon as I can makes sense. That I also won't be losing my mind with trying to get all these angles correct. So next order of business for me is cutting the lap joints. So the lap joints are going to be the stretcher bars that are going across the front and on the back side here. So these are going to be joined together by a lap joint cut into the legs, the leg assembly here. And these are going to be put into place, should be on the right at the tight side, so it's going to have some security by themselves. But then I'm going to also drill holes and peg these in place as well. So that will make a nice strong joint. And the pegs exposed from the front and the back are going to be very characteristic of an arts and crafts style too. So I think that's going to really help sell the authenticity of this stool. All right, all my pieces are cut, and now I just have to map out my lap joints. Okay, now that I have it mapped out on one side, kind of a rough mapping, but at this point I will use these same markings to make sure my opposite side is going to be in the exact same positioning. And then I will use a crosscut sled on the table saw to do multiple passes to remove the majority of this material, and then do the final cleaning with a chisel and mallet. So most of my construction and all of my joinery is done. So at this point I have all my lap joints put in place, glued and pegged. So I have these nice square pegs, very period to the arts and crafts movement. Then we also have my mortise and tenons, 2 of them already glued and set in place. I have 2 more, my last 90-degree tenons. Those need to be glued and put into place. And I'm going to be adding a few little wedges on the tops and bottoms of these tenons as well. These will predominantly disappear once it's all glued up and trimmed down. But this creates a little bit more of a really snug fit. And I want these tenons, because there's so much force being acted on those cantilevers, I want those to be really nice and snug. So I'm adding a few wedges are going to help achieve that. The other thing that I need to do at this point is take my seat top and cut it down to size, because I made this oversized just to be careful with the planing and finishing up everything. I wanted to make sure I preserve my edges really nice, so I made this slightly oversized. So I need to mark it and cut it down to the final dimensions for the seat. And other than that, we're almost good to go for the final glue up and trimming the seat down, and then we'll have something to sit on. It's great. Sitting. So I finished the construction of my Frank Lloyd Wright inspired stool. This is a design that I borrowed the kind of general look of from some images of the Frank Lloyd Wright Taliesin drafting school. And I saw some of these in corners of the pictures. I used those pictures to kind of work up some plans. I used those plans to create a cardboard prototype. And then once I was happy with all my angles and made sure that all the aesthetic and everything kind of worked in the cardboard, then I transferred that to oak and constructed this all out of solid oak. The joinery that I used is mortise and tenons for a lot of my joints, and some lap joints, and with wooden pegs going into the lap joints to make those really nice and strong. The pegs that I used were just square stock that I ripped down on the table saw, and then I mortised out little square holes in the lap joints, and then I went ahead and drilled a hole and inserted the peg, and then that allows you to finish it off really nicely with a square look. Very period for the arts and crafts movement, so it works out really nicely. Yeah, I'm happy with the overall design. I think the look, the cantilever effect is really nice. All the structure works really well. It's extremely comfortable to sit on. It's to my measurement, so it fits perfectly for me to sit and be comfortable on. I can understand why this bench seat is really nice for a drafting stool, because it allows you to kind of like move around, where this is kind of heavy. You don't really want a chair that you would have to like slide or drag around with you. Having this bench top allows you to move around on top really comfortably while you're working on a drawing. At some point I'm going to make a corresponding drafting table, because the drafting tables that were in the same images were actually this exact same pattern, except kind of blown up larger, and you can kind of see how this would look like almost like a desk as well. So I think I'm going to create that at some point. The only difference, or at least the main difference, is that there's a few pivot points on the drafting table, so you can actually change the angle a little bit while you're working on it. But yeah, that's a project for another day, and a bigger studio where I actually have room for a drafting table. But I'm very happy with this. The only thing I have to do now is decide on how I'm going to finish it off. I don't know exactly what finish I would want to use. I'm leaning toward an oak stain and just finishing it off with some Danish oil, but I've been experimenting a little bit more with whitewashes lately, so I kind of am curious about doing this in a whitewash. I think that might be really nice. It kind of depends on the space that I'm going to put it in, and I have really no plans on the space. So I think I'll probably end up just going with a regular oak stain, but I'll do that for another video when I'm talking actually about finishes. A little bit more sanding to do, but pretty much all done. Very happy.